The year was 1980. My wife and I lived in the suburbs of San Diego. Normal Heights, to be exact. We lived in a small house we rented after moving from Imperial Beach about 10 miles to the south. I worked as a quality assurance manager at a small machine shop nearby. It was a small, quiet neighborhood. This was after the war in Vietnam had ended and a lot of the Vietnamese refugees had come to America, a lot of whom had moved into our area. They were friendly enough. However, we were not very sociable people and mostly kept to ourselves. It was me, my wife, and our 2 dogs, Jeep and Buck. Jeep was wicked smart. At times, it was almost like interacting with another human being. Buck was more of a doofus, but a master escape artist. I couldn't count how many times I'd gone to look for him when he'd find his way out of the yard or run amok through the neighborhood. Nothing unusual or strange happened at that house, nor was I ever worried about my family's safety. Most people knew I was not the one to mess with. After all, I had a rather brutal upbringing. My father hung around with bikers and mafia types. Well, I was practically raised by 1%ers. In fact, not long before that, the police had broken into my house, guns drawn, ordering me on the ground and asserting that they would blow my head off. I'll, let you use your imagination to guess why. So, as you can imagine, I'm not easily frightened. That is, until that one night. A night I don't think I'll ever forget. My wife and I were dead asleep that night. I'd gotten off of work late and I was exhausted. When I suddenly awoke to a sound I can only describe as a car smashing into a brick building at full speed. That sent me to vertical in no time flat. My wife and I stared at each other, both of us too shocked to move. After a second or two, I motioned for my wife to stay in bed as I made my way cautiously through the house. It all happened so quick, I couldn't tell where it had come from or what it could possibly have been. I looked out my back door, unable to see anything, as a heavy marine fog had rolled in, leaving me only 10 feet or so of visibility. I quickly grabbed a flashlight from the cabinet by the door and carefully made my way out of the door. The first thing I noticed as I stepped out into my yard was the silence. There were no crickets chirping, no dogs barking, absolute stillness. I felt the hairs on my arms stand on end as I began to become more and more uneasy as I slowly moved through the yard. My yard was small, surrounded by an old 6-foot-tall wooden fence. There was a single low-wattage flashlight above the back porch, which only served to increase the growing feeling of eerie dread that came over me. As I approached the back gate, I stopped dead in my tracks as I shone the flashlight up onto the gate. Or, more accurately, where the gate used to be. I stood there, amazed. It looked as though the gate had been completely ripped off the fence. What could have possibly torn a heavy 6-foot wooden gate straight from the fence? Even the post was torn apart. I shone my flashlight up past the gate, and to my disbelief, I saw my gate across the alley in my neighbor's yard, on the other side of his short chain-link fence, about 25 or 30 feet from where I stood. It was then that I decided whatever had done that was not something I wanted to meet, not with just a flashlight. I turned around and bolted back inside. Needless to say, we didn't get much sleep that night. A few days went by, and all was quiet, as it always had been, until our neighbor, an older, heavier-set lady, showed up at our door. Apparently, she had found Jeep pouring at her door that morning. However, Buck never came home, nor did we ever see him again. That was 20 years ago, and to this day, I don't know what ever happened to old Buck. But what I do know is that shortly after Jeep returned home, my wife and I saw a news story about a group of Vietnamese refugees who had been detained by the local police for hunting neighborhoods for dogs. All of this only after a neighbor had happened upon them cooking the poor creatures a dozen at a time.